Hey there, this is Dan. You're watching the Salty Sea, and I am here today to test out two warbands that have each won a tournament. The matchup here is going to be the Khorne list that won a Valentine's Day tournament, and Lusane's Dark Oath list that won in Warhammer World in a 44-person tournament. Very, very different lists today. The Khorne list is going to be a Blood Reaver Chieftain, a Blood Warrior, 12 Blood Reavers. The Dark Oath list being a Slaughterborn, a Fomeroid Crusher, a Slaughter Priest, a God Speaker, a Glory Seeker with Spear, two Glory Seekers with paired weapons, and then 45 points of Blessings. Let's take a look at the warbands. So I've had these Dark Oath for a while. I made them with the sword because this was back in Red Harvest in 1.0 when the sword was better. Now the axe is much better, but we'll be running it with the axe profile today. I'm going to be using the Khorne Demon as a Slaughter Priest since I don't have one. Then here you see a pile of Blood Reavers. So we're going to set up the battle using a pretty sweet setup from the overthinkingwarcry.com tournament pack that he set up. This is Riverbed, which is a lineup for objectives that I really like here, where they kind of snake across the board, which gives you a bunch of space to put deployments in, but also makes you have to think a lot about where you put people. Those corners are important. You can get from the corner objective to the side objective pretty quickly, but not elsewhere, which is kind of interesting. We're going to be doing this as a treasure mission where it's a little bit like Loot and Pillage, which some of you may have played, where you can loot an objective as an action, but these you can only loot once and then the objective is gone. So it is a very spread out treasure mission. So where Loot and Pillage tends to devolve into 2 to 3 team fights and you just have to win 2 team fights, this might be a little different, might not. We'll see. Some caveats for setting up this mission. I have no idea how these players played these warbands. I don't know what their deployments were. I just know what the lists were, and I didn't find out what the blessings were on the Dark Oath side until after. Luckily, it was pretty similar what I ended up choosing. The wounds on the Slaughterborn never came into play because it never got attacked, but of course the Fomeroid Crusher that I gave +1 attack to did come into play quite a bit. I manipulated things a little bit so that the God Speaker from Dark Oath Savagers would be on in round 1, just to test out whether it's actually any good. I think part of the appeal of Dark Oath has to be that you have this piece, the God Speaker, that even if it is not a very good combat piece, even if your big combat pieces aren't on the board round 1, but it is, that's still an attractive proposition for you because you get a lot of wild dice in theory. So I wanted to make sure that I could test that. So here we see the initial setup of the board. First, front and center is a pile of 4 Blood Reavers. The deployments on Khorne here are wild that way. Then we have some of the cheaper models in Dark Oath ready kind of behind them. Going through some heavy terrain in the center of the board, we see the Fomeroid Crusher and then 1 Glory Seeker who is getting ready to contest that far corner objective that would normally really belong to Khorne with this setup and how many numbers they have. Then we see the 2 medium hitters on Dark Oath ready to come on this side of the board for those 2 treasures, and then a pile of 5 Khorne ready to contest them. So at the end of round 1, we mostly see a lot of movement, which is normal. Because Khorne is pretty quick, they're able to grab a treasure right away, spending an action to loot it, and otherwise they put massed bodies on this side to bog down those 2 heavier hitters. They try the same strategy with the Fomeroid Crusher. The Blood Reaver Chieftain ran over and looted the treasure right away and took 12 damage for his efforts. We also see the Glory Seekers getting up to contest the other objectives and actually taking one of them to sort of try to hold off the Blood Reavers. So interesting stuff in round 1 with the army's kind of positioning. The center objective was wild because the Blood Reaver Chieftain runs in, loots it right away, and then the Fomeroid smacks it for 12, only having 3 health left. That's a pretty average hit given that the Fomeroid Crusher is on +1 attack, so it's possible that looting the objective right away was a bit of a mistake, or it's possible that the actual correct decision would have been to come in and loot with a Blood Reaver and then when the Fomeroid hits you for 12, one shot kills the Blood Reaver, then you could run in with the Chieftain and actually back away a little bit. It's tough to say exactly what the correct answer there is, but I don't know. I don't think I played it optimally. The God Speaker did get to have Dark Oath bank one wild dice and then also gain one from the ability. So that's kind of exactly what you want from it. And then side objectives. I wrote just stuff here. I don't know. The jockeying seems to favor Khorne in that there's so many bodies, but you just don't know like what's going to get torn through on that side with the Slaughter Priest and the Slaughterborn. And I don't know if the bodies were necessarily put in the ideal places. I wonder if they should have been completely giving up on the corner objective and then just huddling to protect the one objective they'd already looted, something like that. It's tough to say how exactly I would play it next time going in as Khorne. But as we are here, Khorne is currently holding 2 of the treasures, Dark Oath holding 1, and 2 of the treasures just have not been looted at all yet. So here we see the armies deployed in the beginning of round 2. The Slaughterborn gets to go right face to face with a Blood Reaver. The same is true of the Slaughter Priest proxy here. We've got the little bit of the fight in the center with Khorne hoping to lock down the Fomeroid Crusher to make it waste actions on Blood Reavers. That should be interesting. And then we have a big team fight with 3 Blood Reavers against 2 Glory Seekers over here. And then perhaps an overcommittal here, 3 Blood Reavers against 1 Glory Seeker for the corner treasure. We'll see how it shapes up in round. So at the end of round 2, we see the Slaughterborn just easily destroyed this Blood Reaver to take this treasure. And then we have a bit of a fight here with the bunches of Khornes fighting against the Slaughter Priest. The Khorne fighters in the center were completely destroyed, most not by the Fomeroid Crusher. And then this team fight is shaping up to be a real thriller. Khorne also easily grabbing the treasure on the far corner. So some noteworthy things about round 2. Khorne lost the center pretty quickly, even though the Fomeroid Crusher had really terrible rolls and actually didn't kill the 1 Blood Reaver it was attacking in the first attack. With 4 dice, you would expect to get better than 10, but it only got 8 and had to attack again, which wasted a lot of activations. But it didn't matter because Khorne had set up a Blood Reaver behind the Blood Reaver Chieftain to, when the Chieftain gets killed, or allow the Chieftain to spend an action to drop the treasure and then have the Blood Reaver, run in and get it. The idea was that the Fomeroid Crusher wouldn't be able to just one-shot kill the Chieftain and then just go grab the treasure, because there would be another Blood Reaver kind of behind, locking him in place so that he can only disengage, he can't run away. So that all was foiled when the God Speaker just easily destroyed the Blood Reaver that was standing behind the Blood Reaver Chieftain, which is pretty wild, and it is a reminder that when Wizard Blasts are hitting on 4s, they can be quite good. Lots of Blood Reavers went down here. There were some pretty poor rolls trying to get into the Slaughter Priest. The Slaughter Priest is only toughness 4, so you would have expected the combined attacks of 2 Blood Reavers and a Blood Warrior that was starting in combat. So this is 5 attack steps. You would have expected them to do more than just 9 damage, but so it goes. The corner treasures are essentially 199 maybe percent secured, where this is maybe overcommitting as Khorne, right? There was a Blood Reaver who just kind of got taken down for no value over on the corner there, where I think I should have known that they were going to have to commit a big fighter to go get that treasure. And so putting a fighter within hitting distance of that treasure was probably not a great idea. And the same is probably having a 3v1 against the Glory Seeker. I'm not sure whether that was worth it either. So some interesting, I think, I'm just not used to playing such a strange faction, and so I'm really into kind of analyzing what I did and trying to figure out if I did anything wrong, because in the early rounds, I think that Corn really gets to set the tone or set the sort of decide on what the fights are going to look like, because you have so many fighters. You get to wait out and really set up everything you want to set up for round two. And your opponent just kind of has to position with the best options. Basically, they have to position to try to constrain Corn's options as much as possible, knowing that all those Blood Reavers are going to get like 5 activations after you're done activating, right? And so, I do think that I generally positioned correctly for Dark Oath. But it's much more complicated for Corn because you have so many more pieces, and you strangely don't have a lot of room for error, because even just losing a couple of them can make quite a bit of difference late in the game, which we will see. So a very interesting round 2, and let's get into round 3. Let's look at the end of round 3, and this is where the killing power of the Dark Oath list really begins to take control here. The Slaughterborn was actually able to use a Rampage to run into the fight, but Khorne was able to use their activations to get a Blood Reaver out of there with the treasure. In the center of the field, the Fomorite has finally lain waste to everything in its path and taken the treasure. And in this team fight, Khorne has essentially won it, but the first 3 fighters that they put on the team fight all were destroyed, and they were forced to bring fighters from the other fight, able to, because of their movement. So, of course, newsflash, Rampages are very good. Dark Oath was able to take a Slaughterborn that was completely out of the battle and get it into the fight and able to do relevant things and change kind of the texture of that battle. But the Blood Reavers were able to kind of do the drop treasure dance, where you maybe attack once and then use an action to drop the treasure, and then have your other Blood Reaver come back and essentially disengage and then run away with it. Pretty interesting. I think also the twist here was to put damage onto wounded fighters who were close to the edge of the battlefield, and in that corner where Khorne was controlling it, both the Glory Seeker and the Blood Reaver that were fighting just decided to leave their doomed fight to go chase other treasures, and that was, I think, a correct decision for both players, because the Blood Reaver that left the fight was actually able to go take a treasure once that sort of center-right team fight just left every single fighter destroyed. The reason that happened was because a Blood Reaver took out a Glory Seeker, and then that left it no longer in combat, and the God Speaker was able to pick it off. That God Speaker just keeps killing Blood Reavers. The Wizard Blast when on 4s is amazing. It's really funny. There's the one team fight where Khorne is just not rolling any damage on the Slaughter Priest. The Slaughter Priest was whiffing against Khorne as well. Just all a mess. And then the one fighter that's like really, really rolling hot is the God Speaker, which is the one I had been skeptical about before. So a lot of interesting fights, but we do see Khorne's numbers starting to really, really dwindle down here as sort of each fighter you take down, it feels like it makes it easier to take down the next one, I find, with these swarm forces. But again, this is not the type of mission that necessarily is meant to to benefit them. So let's take a look at round 4, which has some interesting sort of final scorekeeping, as currently Khorne is holding 3 of the 5 treasures because their activations were just able to allow them to just do so many different things. So here's the final piece of the fight. Khorne has taken this treasure, though lost quite a few fighters for it, but the Fomo Crusher was able to use Hurl Boulder at the Blood Reaver here, take it out, and then the Glory Seeker was able to rush to get up into the vertebrae to take the treasure. And that is the decider for Dark Oath winning this 3-2. So a pretty wild set of end game permutations here. Dark Oath had a lot of ways to tie or win based on what needed to happen, even though Khorne was up on points, because either the Slaughterborn could have taken out the Blood Reaver in one shot, because it wasn't in combat with it originally, so it would had to move and then one hit kill the Blood Reaver, which would have allowed the Slaughter Priest to then move twice and then bloodbind the Blood Reaver that was holding a treasure, bloodbind it into melee range of the Fomeroid Crusher, which then would have been almost a guaranteed kill because it's hitting on threes and only needs one hit to take out that Blood Reaver. The other way was for a God Speaker to one-shot take down a Blood Reaver to go snag a treasure. It had taken 6 damage, so a crit would have done it, or a just like 2 regular hits would have done it, and that didn't work. So she was able to take it out in 2 shots, but then Khorne still had another Blood Reaver in the area to then go get the treasure on the ensuing activation. So the one thing that actually did work for Dark Oath, because both of those were reasonably, reasonable likelihood to work, and in fact, the Slaughterborn was like immensely favored to one-shot kill the Blood Reaver. The one thing that actually did work was the Fomeroid Crusher using Hurl Masonry and then taking out the Blood Reaver with Hurled Masonry, which is like, it's the last reason you take a Fomeroid Crusher in any list, but it was important here, and it was actually what won the game. So pretty wild, but a very fun and interesting game. I kind of expected Dark Oath to win because this mission was not like anything in the pack that this was created for. So, for example, I really thought that this mission would, let me rewind actually to show it to you. I thought that this mission would really test both warbands because the pack that the Khorne warband was in didn't include any missions that only score at the end of the battle, which is a real hallmark of core book missions and a lot of the older missions in Warcry. A lot of those missions really only score at the end, which is a tough place to be if you are a big swarm full of fairly fragile fighters that can often get taken down by the end of the battle. However, I thought it was very interesting because also this Dark Oath list wasn't really designed to deal with these wide-ranging, spread-out battlefields. Again, the Dark Oath list was designed to win the Warhammer World pack, which is very, it's based very much on the core book and on a few White Dwarf missions that only have a couple points of interest. And the idea is to just dominate the couple points of interest that are there towards the end of the game, because almost all of those are scored in round 4, and so your job is to dominate just like 1 or 2 points on the battlefield. And so I thought that this would really challenge Dark Oath by forcing them to spread out in a way that they aren't designed to do. And I thought this would challenge Khorne by forcing them to actually stay on the battlefield, which they aren't really designed to do. And I think in general, I would have expected this to favor, I would expect it to be easier for Dark Oath to manage that hurdle than it would be for Khorne, because it's less of a change for them. But it turned out very, very close, and that made me very impressed with the Khorne list, especially given the things that I think were misplays for me in round 1, specifically in round 1, where I think I committed too many bodies into places where there didn't need to be bodies. And I think that was very interesting because, like, for example, I could have walled off that treasure with Khorne bodies, and then there wouldn't have been anyone contesting that objective in that corner that the Slaughterborn ended up taking, but it still would have forced Dark Oath to put a fighter there. They probably would have flipped it and put the Slaughterborn surrounded by Blood Reavers, but then had the Slaughter Priest down there. But then you could pull the. It's complicated. It's very complicated, but I don't think I'm very happy with my positioning when I was piloting Corn. Whereas I think I piloted Dark Oath more or less optimally, given the deployments. I think it's possible that Lucene would have chosen very different deployments than me because, for example, he knew which 9 missions he had to design for, and so you would just like read the 9 missions and pick the best deployment for those 9 missions, knowing that you're going to play 5 of the 9, right? So his deployments were probably different than mine, but given the deployments, I think I played more or less optimally with Dark Oath and not so with Khorne, which is very interesting given that it ended up being Dark Oath, about 90% to win in the end, even though they ended up having to go down to like their last roll on their lowest percent chance to win. They were actually like hugely favored in round 4, given the immense likelihood of a Slaughterborn to one-hit kill a poor little Blood Reaver when using Onslaught. So a lot of interesting things to think about. That Khorne list is very interesting to play. I'm not sure that I would do it in a tournament myself, but I think it did prove here that there's actual real skill involved to using these fast swarms, to needing to, they have a reasonable amount of killing power on Blood Reavers. They also have the speed, and to me, it's just, you're gonna have way more fighters than your opponent in round 1 when you have 2 deployments of 4 fighters each. Sometimes you'll have 9 fighters on the board round 1, and it's all about how you position to waste your opponent's activations. And it's just a very interesting version of the game that if that appeals to you, you should go for it. But just know that you need to play quickly in order to get your games in on time if you try that. So sort of pick a plan that you're going to do for every Blood Reaver, maybe even go through the mission in your head like quickly and just assign people. I do think it's going to be very, very difficult to play these optimally because positioning is so important. You don't have options necessarily with like taking things down in target priority, because just like a couple dice differently can really ruin your day because your Blood Reavers need to get their hits in quick before they go down. You do have killing power, but it can be difficult, right? Like they whiffed a couple attacks on that Slaughter Priest, and then all of a sudden it was a disaster for them once the Slaughterborn was able to get into the fight. So a lot of interesting things to think about, but I did come away impressed with that sort of wild swarm list, even though they ended up losing. And I think both of these lists are very, very, very playable. So I will have more Warcry content in the future. And until then, may all your rolls be crits.